Last time we ended right at the end of Genesis chapter 2, and there was just a few things that I wanted to maybe correct a little bit about what I said. So I listened to another teaching about the Hebrew word that was used for rib, and when it was translated to rib, that may have been pigeonholing it instead of a more accurate description was Eve was removed from Adam's side, so his whole side was removed. And I also listened to another thing that was speaking about the two different hemispheres of the brain and how one is creative and then one is more logical, practical. So that's the same kind of, and again, the creative would be labeled more feminine and the logical, practical more masculine. So instead of saying that Eve came from just a small portion of Adam's rib cage, it makes more sense for the masculine feminine communion. It makes more sense that Eve came from half of Adam. So then the reconstitution forms a more complete picture of who they are, of what the world is, and who God is. In the covenant marriage of man and woman, it provides a better view of everything, of myself, of the world, and of God. So that's how that, again, the Ezer Kenegdo, that equal and opposing, not opposing as in fighting, but opposing as in opposite, but still equal. So that's important. The other thing, since we're going to talk about today what's often labeled the fall. I don't like that term because, as we spoke about last time, God wasn't surprised when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It wasn't a surprise. He wasn't mad about it. He saw the end from the beginning and said it was very good, the entirety of the thing. It's very good except for the time the woman ate from the tree and then gave to her husband. It's very good except for the time that King David was with Bathsheba, and it was very good except for, so all the things that I've done in my life. No, God said the whole thing was very good. And again, pushing the envelope a little bit, like I was saying about the adversary last time, is maybe it was part of his plan. Maybe it was part of the lamb's plan before he was slain, or when he was slain from the foundations of the earth. And what happened in the garden with Eve when she ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil is she said no to God. She said no to, and essentially also no to her husband. She was in him when God mentioned not to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And she decided to say no to that and to partake anyways. And God knew that's what was going to happen. And we'll touch on today, which we won't touch on for a long time until we get to Mary Magdalene. But let's just remember that she said, we can't eat it or touch it, or else we'll die. And again, thinking that how could they even have a concept of death when nothing had ever died? So that's where we are, that Eve said no to a direct commandment that God gave. And God knew the whole time, just the same as God knew that no man would ever be able to stick to the law of Moses, that nobody would be able to do that. God knew the whole time. So it's one of my favorite things to think about and to talk about is saying yes to something has no power without the possibility of no. So for Adam and Eve in the garden, if there was no possibility of them saying no to God, there's no power in that yes, and there can be no relationship. Oh, my mom just hopped on. Hi, Mom. So we're talking about Adam and Eve in the garden and how Eve essentially said no to God when God told them, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so, yes has no power without the possibility of no. Eve said no. And what's one of the first words that a child speaks? Hey, do you want to eat your broccoli? No, I don't want to eat my broccoli. Or any other things. Want to put on your shoes? No. So that's the it's also it's not necessarily a defiant thing. And that's another something that I've heard oftentimes, and I just said it also, that well, Eve essentially did say no, but let's just consider maybe it's not a defiant thing. It's recognizing that I'm separate now from this person that's telling me to do the thing. So I get to make my own decision and say no. And I'm not saying that it's good or bad. I'm saying that that's what happened in the garden, and it didn't surprise God. God knew that that thing was going to happen, and he still said the entirety of it was very good. So we will go to Genesis 3 now, where we were, where we ended last time. And the other thing I wanted to touch on again was how they were naked at the end of chapter 2. So being naked is not necessarily only without clothing, but also being able to be the fullest expression of your authenticity without fear or shame or embarrassment or anything like that. And allowing yourself to be gracious with yourself and with other people when mistakes are made. Um, Recognizing that we're all here to help each other. We're all here just the same as Adam and Eve. We're there to help each other in the garden, and then after they were removed from the garden. So in Genesis 3, it says, it starts speaking about the serpent. So the serpent was more subtle or more sly or more crafty than any of the beasts in the field that God had made. So that was something as well that we spoke about last time, that God made the serpent. God made the serpent. God made the adversary to do a thing. So the adversary's job is to question and strengthen the word that was planted. So in order for something to be strong, it needs good roots. I have two large Draconaceae trees, and I saw a little video once that said that they like it when you shake them because it helps them to grow stronger roots. If they're out in nature, that's what's going to happen with the trees in nature. And being nimble enough to move with those breezes is important. So being able to be shaken and not broken is important. And I believe that the majority of times that I've been shaken and then broken are because I lean more on my emotions than I do on who God says I am and how to navigate heavy, stressful situations. So the thing that a tree needs in the wilderness to be able to be strong and to be able to be confronted with adversarial thoughts like Eve was, again, in Genesis 3. Eve was confronted with an adversary. She had a word, it was challenged. The thing that a tree, a physical tree, needs in the wilderness to stay nimble during large winds is water. So in order for when a tree is dead, it no longer has the water within its system. The wind blows, the tree breaks. We need to go to the living water, which is Jesus Christ. And again, it's Philippians 4:8 keeps coming up for me. That's dwell on these things. So think on these things, things that are righteous and good and praiseworthy and things that will build us up. So taking control of the mind is one of the most important things, because we touched on last time, maybe, oh no, that's today, we were going to touch on how what happened with Eve in the garden is mimicked in, or is a foreshadowing of what happened successfully in Jesus after he was tempted after his 40-day fast. And he came out victorious, again, because he was not swayed by the adversarial winds that were presented to him. He was steadfast in who he was according to who God says he is, and he was filled with the living water, able to move. So yes, the adversary is not necessarily bad. 1 Thessalonians 5:21 goes along with this idea. It says, do not quench the spirit, do not treat prophecies with contempt, but test them all. Hold on to what is good and reject every kind of evil. So it's not putting my fingers in my ears and pretending not to hear the adversaries or those things. It's testing them all and then putting them up against who God says he is, who God says I am, who God says my fellow believers are, my brothers and sisters, who God says God says the world is. And then to hold fast to that and not hold fast to my emotions or my feelings that are usually in high stress situations constricting. So I can recognize that I'm experiencing those feelings and I can allow God's holy water to wash it away and not make my decisions based on how I feel, which is what Eve did. Back to this study that she says it's pleasing to the eye and good for food. As it said in Genesis 2:9, God made all of the trees pleasing to the eye and good for food. Where we went wrong with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is the third part where she says, and she saw that it was good to make one wise. So what God was doing with Adam and Eve in the garden was fathering them into their proper position, because they were to be brought up to be sons of God, right? Jesus died so that he could be the first of many brothers. So he sets the standard for essentially for Adam and Eve as well, because Jesus was slain before the foundations of the world. He died for the whole world, including Adam and Eve, including all of the people that died before he went to the cross. So what God told Adam and Eve was to protect them, the same as parents tell children, don't touch that, it's hot. So how many times have children touched the things that immediately, as soon as you say don't touch that, it's hot, finger out, ready to touch the thing? So Adam and Eve did the thing that children did, and God knew that was going to happen. It's interesting to remember that they were in literal paradise. They had everything that they ever needed. There were things to do, but they didn't have to toil and work really hard and move heavy things and awkward things like we did this morning. And they were able to exist and to fellowship with each other and to fellowship with God. and they were just told, don't touch this one thing, and then they touched the one thing. So the serpent went to Eve and not Adam. And again, Eve is, so I titled it on Facebook, Eve is the mother of all living. And that comes at the end of chapter 3, when she gives birth to Cain and Abel and then Seth. Eve is referred to as the mother of all living. It's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to recognize that challenges due to behaviors that were out of alignment with God's original plan lead to hard things. And then they also always lead back to God, right? So we'll scoot down to where Eve takes the fruit and then gives to her husband. My Bible's not loading, so I believe it's loaded now. That's just more reason for a physical Bible. So Adam and Eve ate from the fruit. Well, Eve did first and then gave to her husband. And it says when in chapter 3, verse 6, when the woman saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eyes and that the tree was desirable to make one wise, she took from its fruit and ate. And she gave also to her husband and he ate. Again, if we think about children, especially teenagers, when all parents are doing is trying to help them not destroy themselves, they're adamantly doing things that are destructive. And just as good parents recognize this and are able to damage control, God also damage controls, and there's a whole plan for this. God knew it was going to happen. So it says the eyes of both of them were open, and they knew they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. As it said at the end of chapter 2, they were naked, but they didn't know it in a way that made them care. Like they were naked and carefree, like a baby that rips off his diaper and runs squealing through the house. And when God says we are to become like little children, that's the kind of little children we are supposed to become like. Not necessarily taking off all of our clothes and streaking through the neighborhood, but being carefree and just able to just be. So the woman take of the tree and ate of the tree and then gave to her husband. They knew they were evil. And then the serpent's gone, right? And then that's it. The word was challenged. They did not cling fast. They, as we were talking about last week, that very strong word where we're supposed to cleave to the word of God. They did not cleave to the word of God. They did not eat of the tree of life. They ate of the tree of knowledge. And that's when they saw things that maybe they weren't ready to see. Just the same as a baby wanting to hold on to a kitchen knife. You're not big enough to, you're not aware of yourself and your fingers enough to be able to hold that sharp thing. But a parent will bring you up into that, will give you, in which I believe that's what God was doing in the garden, that they would have had access to the tree of knowledge once they were ready for it. But instead they skirted over that and did what they wanted to do, which most children do. God knew it. He wasn't mad at them, but there are consequences to what happened. So the Lord was walking in the cool of the day, as he did, I would venture to say, every day, to visit with Adam and Eve, to fellowship with them. That's why God created us, because he wants a family. He wants us to have community with each other and community with him. So he went to do that, and he asked Adam, "Where are you?" So he didn't ask Eve where she was. He asked Adam where he was. And do we think that God, the all-knowing creator of the universe, had no idea where Adam was? Probably knew exactly where he was. And it was a different situation. So Adam shifted and was not in the state that God had last seen him. He was in a different state. And fig leaves are important too, that they chose fig leaves, because that was what Jesus cursed when he was looking for food. So trees represent people in a lot of the scriptures. And when Jesus was looking for food, he was hungry. He saw the fig tree that was full of leaves but had no fruit. And that was in reference to the religious leaders of the time. They looked like they should have all of the fruit, which was good for food and pleasant to the eye, but they didn't. So that was representative of the religious leaders at the time. The fig tree, he cursed the fig tree, and then it withered and died the next day. So that's what Adam and Eve chose to cover themselves with. It's a false thing. So it didn't change the fact that they were naked, especially in the eyes of God, because God can see through all of anything that I try to put in front of myself to hide my shame or guilt. So God said, "Have you eaten of the tree which I commanded you not to eat?" And Adam immediately said, "It was the woman you gave me." So he went from lifting up and exalting this woman. Oh, this, at last, there you are, flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone. And then immediately chucks her right under the bus. So, and he said, "Before that, I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked." Again, he always was naked, but then after he ate from the tree of knowledge, he knew he was naked and was ashamed, because maybe he did realize things that he had done prior that were outside of the alignment of God. But just the same as we talked about the baby learning to walk, when the baby falls down, you don't call the baby stupid and give it a smack. You help the baby up, give it a hug, and help it to walk more, which is all God ever wants to do with us. Even at the time of Adam and Eve, even at the time of Cain and Abel, after Cain, because we're not going through the men of the Bible, so I'll touch on it now. After Cain murdered his brother, God wanted to console him. God wasn't there to hand out punishment until Cain got snarky and denied that anything had happened with Abel. Just the same as Adam is getting snarky about what happened. He had an opportunity to say, "Yes, I did the thing that you told me not to do. How do we fix it?" And then Eve had the opportunity too to say, "Yes, I did the thing you told me not to do. How do we fix it?" But she deferred to the serpent and said, "Well, the serpent tricked me," and which again is true, but is that the best way to go about that? So we're nearing about the end of our time. So to pull everything together, what happened? And I don't want to call it a fall, because it wasn't a fall, because I guess we could, but more like not like a fall from grace, because of Jesus we have all the grace, and he was slain before the foundations of the world. So he was slain before this took place. So they were still within the grace. So it's not a fall from grace. It's a fall like a baby falls when it's learning to walk. So nothing is wrong. This is just the path that we're walking with God, with each other. And we're all just learning to be the most authentic versions of ourselves. so that we can be in fellowship with each other, so that we can help cultivate the earth in a way that God originally intended it to be, and so that we can be those Ezer Kenegdos for those strong warriors for our partners in marriage, for our partners in family, for our partners in relationship. So maybe this is what had to happen. Just like you sometimes, if you're working out, you have to lift heavy things and it's painful and it hurts. Maybe this is what had to happen for us to have those strong roots. Just something to consider. So next week there might be a few things to touch on, but we'll move on to the birth of Cain and Abel from Eve's perspective. And that's all I have for today. So we have a